What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We were here with some more PGA DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel, this time for the Genesis Scottish Open. In this video, we will give you the top 10 plays from our data-driven Occupy model for your PGA DFS lineups for the Scottish Open. We will take a look at what industry projections are telling us and what that means for the ownership in our DFS contest. Then we'll transition, look into the betting markets, see which golfers' odds are moving one direction or another, and how that can be important for our PGA DFS lineups. And then we'll close out the show with some weather notes, with us being across the pond and this course being exposed to the wind. That could be very important as well. And we'll use all the information in this video at the very end and build a live lineup for a PGA DFS tournament. So stick around to the very end for that. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester. I'm a co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, and I am still a Fantasy Golf World Championship qualifier on DraftKings for 2025, as you see on screen, and we'll talk about that here in a second. And I am joined, as always, by Niromada, our PGA DFS analyst at Occupy Fantasy. Niro, happy Links Golf Week. How are you?
Good. I'm good. It's two reasons to be excited this week. Round two for the Fantasy Golf World Championships and major prep with the Open Championship next week. So this is the week to play a lot of satellites, pay more attention to golf this week than you maybe normally would, unless you're a sicko like I am, so that you can get ready for next week, and then sending Brian the positive karma and vibes for getting through the second round of the FGWC and making the final.
Absolutely. Maybe we can get our body clocks right this week too, with the early start time overnight Thursday morning. It'll be the same next week as well. So I certainly will be awake before lock, checking for any last minute withdrawal. So Nero, before we jump into this week, let's just recap last week, and we will talk about round one of the Fantasy Golf World Championship. If you didn't watch this video last week, this was the qualifier for round one of the big live final contest for golf on DraftKings. 300 entries, 300 qualifiers. You cannot directly buy in. The top 150 advanced. It was during the John Deere. I finished 124th, easily advanced into round two. Now this week, with the remaining 150, the top 50 advanced. Nero, you and I obviously were talking all week about this, sweating it up through Sunday. But let me get your thoughts just on the contest in general, how the ownership shook out. If you want to discuss my lineup, go for it.
I thought it was, well, first of all, your lineup I thought was pretty good. It was very close, not exact, but it was very close to what I submitted for my cash lineup for DraftKings. I think going into it, we knew Chris Kirk would be low owned because he wasn't a favored combination of most of the optimizers that were out there. But I know we both felt pretty good about his floor for that type of contest. And let me tell you, he found his floor on the weekend. Thought he was going to withdraw there for a while. Don't know why he shot what he shot on Saturday, but anyway, he got across. But yeah, I thought it was well constructed and had a nice solid floor, and that's what you were looking for, in this contest. I think the thing that struck me is the same thing that always strikes me when I look at these lineups in this type of event, or even in just like the nosebleed stakes, 5,000 above, $1,000 entries, even like $500 plus entries. How close the lineups adhere to like the mathematical optimals. And it doesn't even really matter what projection system you're using. Most of them will spit out something relatively close. Some of the 7K values might differ and that kind of thing, but it's usually generally pretty close. And because there are so many of the highest level players that have such a disproportionately large number of entries in something like this, the ownership is just, it surprises me every year, but it shouldn't. Ben Griffin's ownership, absolutely ridiculous. And of course he didn't make the cut. But the truth was, it didn't really matter because so many people had him in this event, and so many lineups got across that had him on there. Like, you're basically playing somebody like that for the block. So when we talk about all the time when we do the value bumps section, like that's what we're talking about. Like, this is what you see. You play those players in lower risk, smaller contests, and you don't be afraid to fade them. Not even really fade them, but just to get under their ownership in the large field contests. Because let me tell you, the path to first was way, way easier this week in lineups that didn't have Ben Griffin in them for large field contests. But in this type of contest, I would say you're probably doing it wrong if you didn't have Ben Griffin on your lineup.
Yeah, you could have played Jason Day, who also missed the cut and was lower owned and
Or
scored even
JT
less points.
Poston.
Or Poston, of course. So, but yeah, and my takeaway was, and it was something we talked about last week. It's something we talk about every week, but it was especially evident in this type of contest with this type of competition is just all the industry projection plays. That segment we talk about each week. These guys will be higher owned in your high stakes, your high dollar GPP lineups. Those guys were just elevated even further in this contest. We talked about Hubbard, we talked about Lee Hodges, we talked about Ben Griffin. Griot was just off the list that we decided to include in the show. So yeah, just knowing, and a lot of those pro players who played these golfers made it to next week. So it should make my job once again pretty easy when it comes to projecting ownership. And we'll get to that when we talk about it in the high stakes bumps section here in a couple seconds. Instead, let's go ahead and let's look at our Occupy model, our data driven course fit top plays for the Genesis Scottish Open. And Nero, we have a pretty packed, stud packed lineup this week in terms of guys at the top. Scotty is back in, Rory's here, Xander, Fleetwood, Morikawa, Oberg. I mean, all the guys are playing this tournament as they prep for the Open next week. So it should be no shock if you followed golf for just even a second this year that Scotty Scheffler is number one in our model this week. But Nero, his biggest wart has been his inability to putt well on these slow greens. You look at how slow these greens are compared to the typical PGA Tour courses that these guys play. Massively, massively slower because the ball needs to stay on the green because of the wind coming off the coast as these courses are so exposed to the wind. So incredibly slow, and it takes a while to get used to. Nero, what are your thoughts on Scotty's putting here and how we should play him this week?
Yeah, with Scotty, you're always nitpicking when you're trying to come up with reasons not to play him. I think the putting on the slower greens is one thing. And the second thing would just be that he still hasn't quite proved it yet in links golf. So he's very into fair outcomes. We've talked about that before in these shows. And links golf will often give you some unfair outcomes. Now, to this week, they're not at what you would call like a true classical links course. Maybe we'll call it like a links adjacent. But that would be the nit that you're picking with him this week is that pedigree on links courses and the putting on the slower greens. Um, I as of today, I think I'll be doing my revised strategy with Scotty, which is that I will for sure at least be meeting the field with him, if not going over, unless I find some other more compelling piece of information that tells me there's a good reason to be underneath him. Otherwise, I just don't think that he's still being I don't think his floor is properly priced into his DraftKings price. I think they would really need to make him above 15K probably to get something that was a more accurate reflection of like his worst outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it's going to be a tough decision this week. And just looking at our early ownership projections, he's not as high as I thought he might have been. But again, we still have another full day for those ownership projections to materialize. Next in our model, Nero, the next three guys are in the top half of the pricing this week. It might not be the guys you expect it to be, but it is Victor Hovland, it's Siwoo Kim, and it's Ludwig Oberg. And Hovland, Oberg have the European pedigree, obviously, growing up playing these types of courses, but talk to me about Hovland, talk to me about Oberg, talk to me about Kim. But to me, Nero, as the motto is identifying long iron play is going to be especially important this week, as is overall distance.
Yeah. Well, Hovland and Siwoo get the putting regression, putting variance bump. Ludwig doesn't get that. Although Ludwig needs all the bumps that he can get, given how he's been playing lately. But yeah, all of them very good in longer irons and the ball striking, which is what you really need around here. I describe this course as a course where distance is helpful, but it's not completely necessary. And I just think that because of the undulations in the green and the pop bunkering around the greens, that's the biggest defense of the course. And so the best way to go at that defense is with like really precise ball striking with your irons, especially on the ones that are a little bit longer than your standard, like driver wedge courses that these guys play in the U.S. So I think that's why you see all three of those guys up near the top of the model. And like I said, Hovland and Kim also get the little bonus putting regression.
Next, this may be a surprise. Number 5 in the model this week is, I guess we can call him golfing boyfriend, but Nero, you guys might be on a break right now. It's Luke Clanton.
As I said in my write up last week, that I was a broke in with the N in parentheses record about Clanton because he's draining my bankroll slowly but surely. Again, elite talent, good long iron player, and good ball striker, and obviously has the distance. So no surprise why I see him. We'll see him up near the top of the model. I followed him very closely, more closely than I should have followed any individual over the last couple weeks of his playing golf. And I can tell you his putting inside of 6 feet is very problematic right now, and I don't love that. So I will absolutely play him this week because he is in my stable of golfing boyfriends. I'm not sure that I'm going to go out of my way to get crazy over the field on him this week because I also am unclear on his links golf experience. I don't think he has too much of it, so that'd be another negative. But clearly has the talent that if he can straighten out some of that short putting to play very well this week. I just don't. He might have to do it without me, and of course that will kill me if he does that.
You don't, you never want to see your exes flourish in life, and so Clanton.
No, never, never, ever.
Yeah, so Clanton, if you two are broken up, we'll see if you can flourish this week. Speaking of success at links courses, this guy has them in heaps. It is Xander who has won on this course as recently as 2022. Xander is sixth in our model Nero, and he's starting to show signs of bouncing back from that early season rib injury. Still hasn't missed any cuts. We're starting to see some spikes and some low rounds. Are you ready to jump back on the Xander train yet?
I would say yes. I think he's pretty appropriately priced for where he is. Obviously, he wasn't good at the Travelers in his last start, but 12th at the U.S. Open before that, and a whole bunch of top 25 finishes once he kind of got past the players. It got past his injuries, so we know he's a very good ball striker. We know he's a good long iron player. We know he can handle we can handle this type of golf. In fact, he was first here at the Renaissance Club in 2022. So, I think it can be a perfectly fine week to play Xander. I'll definitely be watching the press conference and reading through the notes to see if I get any other information on him. But I think he's a good fit, and we know he can handle the overall part of the course. So I will not be afraid to play Xander this week for sure.
Now, as we close out the top 10 of the model, a variety of different guys here, and one of them in particular, like Xander, we will be watching the press conference quotes on Wednesday to get some clarification on a recent situation with him. These four guys, first of all, it's Taylor Pendrith, who's a distance guy, ball striker. It's Corey Connors, the noted ball striking robot. It's Robert McIntyre, who has finished first and second here in the last 2 years. And then it's Keith Mitchell, who ranks pretty highly in most of the metrics we look at this week, is due for some putting regression because he'll need it because the fifth metric that he does not rank highly in, it is putting on slow greens. So, but Nero, the guy that we have to keep an eye on is Corey Connors, who the last time we saw him withdrew after round three after hurting his wrist at the U.S. Open. Obviously, a great fit at this course given his ball striking, but we have to be cognizant of any potential lingering effects of that wrist issue.
Yeah, 100%. Those folks that are Occupy members, be watching the Discord, be watching the plug and the Wednesday update for any updates that we come across on Connors. The one downside, well, there's many downsides to playing PGA DFS, but in comparison to other sports, the injury information is very hard to find. It's even harder than like in college football. And anybody that plays college football DFS, God bless your soul for trying to find out that information on Friday, Saturday. But this is, I mean, PGA is, I mean, there are literal reporters that should be covering this stuff on a daily basis, and instead produce content that is absolutely blowing your mind stupid before a golf tournament. And you're just like, can somebody ask and find out if Corey Connors' wrist is better than it was? Someday that might change, but until then, gotta stay on top of that. If you're not an Occupy member, that's okay, but just make sure you're searching on Twitter and any other sources for Connor's wrist information before you put your lineups in. But he's very much the same as Taylor Pendrith. He's just not he's a better ball striker, and he's not quite as long, but they're both good long iron players, good ball strikers. McIntyre, I expect to be very popular here. As you mentioned, Brian, first and second in his last two trips here. He kind of pairs nicely with Scotty Scheffler as kind of like a spend up, high ceiling option in your lineup. And I expect a lot of lineups to be submitted that have Scheffler and McIntyre paired together, and then a bunch of guys in the low sevens or the high sixes for the rest of their lineups on DraftKings. And Keith Mitchell, he makes sense, like you said, as a good categorical fit. Also, someone who from Georgia, Southeast, played in a lot of coastal windy venues and has had a lot of good success on those. And yes, an American coastal windy venue is different than a true links course. Coastal windy venue in Europe, but Mitchell would be not. It would be someone I wouldn't mind having at events like this, even though he hasn't had a lot of success here. He's got 3 starts here, 2 missed cuts, and a 36th. But theoretically, playing decently well enough and can handle the conditions.
All right, so we mentioned the Scheffler McIntyre combo likely being popular this week. We talked about how the ownership shook out in the Fantasy Golf World Championship round one. So now let's talk about who those guys will be this week at the Scottish Open. We take a look at industry projections every single week. They often tell us these set of guys will be higher owned in these high dollar, smaller tournament contests than they will be in the lottery and the large field GPPs. Nero, you've taken a look at the industry projections so far on Tuesday. Who are they telling us will be higher owned than we expect in our smaller contests, and who I should be weary of in my round 2 contest?
Yeah, so on both sites, there's three players. Obviously, the first one anyone could guess without me even saying his name, but Scotty Scheffler, and then the other two are Chris Gotterup and Marco Pengui. So again, both of those players are there just because they're pretty relatively low priced compared to their odds to win in the outright betting markets. So you've got those three that go across both DraftKings and FanDuel. On DraftKings specifically, we would add Fleetwood, Robert McIntyre, and Kevin Yu to those three. And then on FanDuel, we would add Rory McIlroy and Matt Wallace to those three. And again, as we talk about in here most weeks on FanDuel, it is just simply easier because of their pricing structure to have stars and scrubs builds. So almost always on FanDuel, the guys at the very top of the range this week, that's Scheffler and McIlroy, get ownership bumps because they're so easy to fit into lineups, and the people who use optimizers to help build or who mass multi-enter will just default to those constructions. So you're going to see those guys get the higher bumps on FanDuel.
Yep, exactly. And we see double stud lineups all the time over on FanDuel. Shouldn't be any different this week. Now let's transition and let's look at the betting markets. And this is a great way if you're thinking, well, how can I get different from industry projections? How can I find those lower owned guys? Not only can you use the lower owned guys in our model, but you can also take a look at the betting markets. And very often we find low owned guys who see their odds to win improve at multiple sharp sports books. We monitor this every single week. And if they improve at every sports book that we monitor, we label them a trifecta play. Those golfers historically have had fantastic success at much lower ownership. You look at last week, I believe we had 6 trifecta plays by the time it was all said and done. 5 of those 6 made the cut, which was very hard to do last week when only 1% of lineups got 6 out of 6 golfers through the cut. So, Nero, as we look to this week, 2 early trifecta plays, and then we'll look at some other guys who have multiple moves so far. We are recording this Tuesday afternoon, so we still have another 36 hours to fully finalize trifecta plays, and we'll post the final list in the Daily Plug on OccupyFantasy.com as well as in our Discord on Wednesday evening. Nero, the 2 guys that are early trifecta plays, 2 European guys, one guy on the PGA Tour, one guy on the DP World Tour. It's Matty Schmid, who we've talked about in similar type of events when long irons are required, and it's Ewan Ferguson of the DP World Tour. When you see these 2 names, what are your first thoughts?
Matty Schmidt is interesting. I had some exposure to him last week in various ways, so I was paying close attention to how he played at the BMW. And he rebounded. He had a very poor first round shot, 72, but then rebounded with a 66, 68, 67 to finish 7th. But my favorite thing about Schmidt is he either finishes in the top 10, basically, or he misses the cut. So if you go back to the Puerto Rico Open, so all the way back to March 9th, he has 6 missed cuts and a withdrawal. He's also finished seventh, second, seventh, ninth, 28th, and sixth in that same span of events. So he basically either top tens or he misses the cut. But again, in a high risk lineup setting, someone who's getting market confirmation and we know has a very high ceiling, shouldn't have too much ownership. Feels like he makes a great high risk play. Ferguson is a little bit more consistent than Schmid, not by a ton. He's really only known to people who follow the European Tour closely. Um, I would be less enthusiastic on him compared to Schmid, but again, a little bit more consistent. He's only missed one cut on the DP World Tour since going all the way back to March, and he does have a fourth and a second at the KLM and the Sudal Open back in May. So don't mind him as much, but like Schmidt a little bit longer. And Schmidt also has more competition on the PGA Tour compared to the DP World Tour, and again the competition level there is just simply higher. So value those finishes on the PGA Tour more than I value those finishes on the DP World Tour.
And on that note, I actually posted in our Discord server last night. Someone asked about how European golfers fare at this particular event. We have 3 years of data where they've crossed over the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour. If you look at top 10 finishers, and because of ties, there was like 35 or 36 guys over the last 3 years, 69% of the top 10 finishers at this event over the last 3 years were European. However, despite 70, 80 DP World Tour golfers being in this event, in this field every single year, just 20% of those top 10 were DP World Tour. So, Nero, what it tells me is if you just had nothing else to go off of, you should be looking more at European guys who play on the PGA Tour to have a high chance of finishing in the top 10 at this event.
Yeah, I mean, your first thing you'd say would be like, give me all the flags that aren't U.S. flags when I'm making my lineups. And as a simple, again, if you're trying to keep it as simple as you can, one criteria would be a person with a non-U.S. flag who plays on the PGA Tour. Guess what? They're probably better than a person with a non-U.S. flag who plays on the DP World Tour. That's why they're playing on the PGA Tour. No matter how they got there, no matter how they qualified for it, they're probably just better. So that would make sense. And I think it's a you're we can often overcomplicate these things, but I think if you had a macro strategy this week of trying to emphasize the players of European descent who play on the PGA Tour, I think you'd probably be in pretty good shape when the week was over.
And on that note, if we look at the other 6 guys who have seen multiple betting market moves, they're not fully on that trifecta list yet. They may be. We'll see by Wednesday evening. But of the 6, 3 are of European descent. I'll name the 6 guys, Nero. You tell me just how you feel about the list in general. If you want to point out 1 or 2 facts about any of the guys, go for it. It's Jordan Smith or Jordan L. Smith, depending on your database, which has not tripped us up whatsoever at Occupy Fantasy ever. It's Colin Morikawa. It's Christian Bezuidenhout. It's Christopher Wrighton. It's Byung-Hun An. And it's Marco Pinch, who I believe is how you pronounce his name because I looked it up right before this show. So we have 3 DP World Tour guys in Smith, Wrighton, and Pinch, and then 3 PGA Tour players and Morikawa, Bezuidenhout, and Benny On. So you see that list, Nero. Give some people some more information about those guys.
Okay, first of all, good job on the penge. Got that. I will change my pronunciation. I think it's Raytan, maybe for Christopher. Anyway, first thought on those guys. So Jordan Smith is one of the better players on the DP World Tour. Like he's usually priced 10K plus, and he deserves to be very well rounded. Second in his last start at the BMW, very solid player. Can play with the players on the PGA Tour. Morikawa, I think, wouldn't be a surprise because he fits in the mold of the guys that you saw near the top of the model with his ball striking and very accurate iron play. Zadenhout, good putter on slow greens and also a very, very good short game, very crafty short game player. So, and if anything, he sprays his driver and that's what gets him in trouble. And on a course like this, you just don't have as much trouble. I know in the last couple of years, they've kind of pinched the fairways in here and there's a little bit more of that tall, wiry fescue for the rough, but it still tends to be a course where doesn't matter as much what you do with the driver, and he thrives in those types of environments. Raytan, if that's how we're going to say it, or that's how I'll just say it for now. Uh, second and fourth in I think his last five DP World Tour starts, and is making a habit of going really, really low on Sundays to either win or get close. So again, another guy that we would have a good ceiling feeling for. Ben On's got some of the driving distance and also has some of the ball striking stats, and then Penge driving distance, yes, but really just well-rounded player. Yeah, he won I think 6 starts ago on the DP World Tour. He's made cut before on the PGA Tour. Seems like he's up. Like when you look at his strokes gained chart on Data Golf, like you can see from early 2023 to middle of 2023, just slowly creeping up and to the right continuously, all the way through 2024 and 2025. Things like that tell you that, like, okay, here's a player who's improving slowly but surely, month after month, week after week. So someone that you want to be paying attention to on a week like this.
Yeah, and I was pretty disappointed to see that he was on the industry projections list, Nero, because Model has him rated pretty highly. He's getting the betting market love, and I think depending on the contest you're in will determine his ownership. If you're in a really soft contest, his ownership could be 3 to 5%. If you're in a sharper contest, it could be much higher. So something we have to keep in mind for sure. And another thing we have to keep in mind is the weather, as we hit on the top of the show. So let's bring up the forecast here. One of our favorite sources, Wind Finder, and this tournament is prone to be affected by the wind, as it should be, as it's a links course on the coast. And the difference in scoring is pretty dramatic when the wind is up. You look at when Xander won in 2022, and it was incredibly windy. He won the tournament at 7 under par. Compare that to last year when Bobby Mack won at 18 under par. Between those two events, Nero, it was a 2 to 3 shot difference per round in terms of scoring. That changes a lot of things. So now we look at this forecast and we see some early wind on Thursday. I guess just what are you seeing now, but then also let people know who may not be too familiar with links golf and weather forecasts in this area of the world, how dramatically this could potentially change over the next 24 hours.
And these are the type of events where when I write the plug and I put my guess in for what the winning score is going to be, then in parentheses I put completely wind dependent, because the wind is like the number one defense of all of these courses. So when the wind blows, they play much harder, and when the wind doesn't blow, it plays much easier. I think when the wind blows, the having links experience and having a verified pedigree at coastal windy venues means a lot more than it does when the wind doesn't blow. So if we look at the forecast, we see that Thursday is going to be by far the windiest day of the tournament. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday look exceptionally calm given the location. So shouldn't see too much wind. By the way, there's always some wind at these type of venues, but we shouldn't see too much that affects the players that much on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So again, I think if you're a prop player, you're doing that kind of thing, you'd be looking at higher scoring average on Thursday than you would on the other 3 days. So you could potentially use some of that knowledge to your advantage. Looks like the wind's more down Thursday afternoon. Probably would play that angle pretty heavily in showdown if the forecast holds. Play more of the players in the afternoon wave than I would in the morning. Going to be gustier. So certainly the Thursday morning players, as it looks today, look like they're going to get the worst of the conditions across the 4 days. I would factor that into my 4 day decision making, but I would not. The difference in the wind gusts is like 6 or 7 miles an hour. So it's there, but it's not ridiculous. And even at the height, it doesn't look like it gets above like 18 miles an hour. So it's not quite enough to really have a massive influence on the scores. So while I would prefer guys in the Thursday afternoon wave, it's not going to stop me from playing players that I like that are playing Thursday morning. They'll just have a slightly more difficult path to the first place on Sunday afternoon.
Guess we can't play Scotty, who plays in the morning on Thursday. Just we could not play Scotty with 6 miles per hour more wind. So again, monitor the forecast, and Nero will be putting updates in the daily plug over on Wednesday afternoon at occupyfantasy.com. Nero, let's close it out and let's build a lineup here live on this video. And as we normally do when we build this lineup is who is the cheapest golfer we feel comfortable with. That level of comfort will vary from event to event. Which golfers have seen multiple love in our various sources, our Occupy model, industry projections, if you're in a lower dollar contest. betting markets, the daily plug when it's up at Occupy Fantasy. And then we keep ownership in mind as we are building this. So, Nero, pretty interesting game this week of who's the cheapest golfer we feel comfortable with. I was looking at someone like Wrighton at 6,900. We look at someone that like Penge at 7K, who we have to be cognizant of his ownership in sharper contests, and a variety of other guys. So I'll ask you, who's the cheapest golfer you feel comfortable with in let's say, a 500 player GPP on DraftKings?
Yeah, Penge, someone I was looking at for sure. Matty Schmid at 6,900, also someone that I was looking at for that size of contest. I don't know as I scroll through that I have anyone below those. There's probably a few that I would play, but I don't know that I would recommend other people playing them. I think the lowest I would go would be Valimaki at 6,800, but I would be more comfortable with Kuvra, Matty Schmid, Ferguson, all those at 6,900 or Penge at 7K.
Okay, here's what we'll do. We'll play Penge at 7K. And if we realize that the rest of our lineup is super chalky, we will drop to Ferguson. We will drop to Matty Smith or one of the other guys that you mentioned. So now, Penge at 7K, that leaves us 8,600 left per player. We could go Scotty or we could go hashtag balance build. And judging by your analysis earlier, Nero, it sounds like you do want to play Scheffler this week. Do you feel any differently in a contest of this size?
No, I think I would rather play him than not play him. That still leaves 74, 75 for the last four golfers. You can get creative enough. You can get creative enough there to do some stuff. And I think really for me the question always boils down to, how many players like in the 8K range do I want to play?
Hmm.
Because that's what a non-Scheffler lineup really gives you. So if instead of spending up to Scotty, you spend up to Schauffele at 10,100, well, the last four spots you can have 8,300 per player. So if I love those players in that range, and I know I can't quite get to them on a Scheffler build, then sure, I would maybe be a little more prone to put a non-Scotty build into a contest of this size. But personally, I prefer those builds to be in the super large field stuff. And for something like this, I'd rather just take my square with Scheffler and try and get different in the other four spots.
The alternative is to, and we talked about this last week, and the big difference obviously was the debate was Ben Griffin versus Scotty Scheffler. But last week we played a 3-9K lineup where we had Thor Bjornsson, we played Lucas Glover and Chris Kirk, and that would have been fantastic in any contest. We would have thrown that in. We could do similar this week with Morikawa, Oberg, Hovland, McIntyre, even if you go down to Sam Burns or Corey Connors. So that's another viable option. It says Nero that when the floor and ceiling of the guy you're fading of Scheffler is much different than Ben Griffin, is not as viable because all it takes is one of those guys to fail and your whole lineup is is out the window.
Yeah, especially if, again, because when you're making these assumptions, assuming that Scotty's floor is literally like a top 10 finish, because that's basically what his floor has been for all of 2025. So when his floor is a top 10, and really more likely than not, it's like a top five. That's kind of what the floor has been for the last couple of months. Like that's really tough to overcome. All of those guys need to hit. You can't have any miscuts from the rest of those guys if that's the type of build that you go with.
Exactly. And so if we build Penge and Scheffler, 7,400 left per player, you almost have to play another low 7K guy in the 7,000, 7,100 range. And if you do that, you end up with guys at the industry projections like Kevin Yu, like Chris Goddard, like who else? I think that's it in this range. But we could go to someone like Schmid, Wrighton. Let's just put in Schmid or Wrighton here at 6,900. That increases our salary remaining to 7,700 per player. Then we can get up to guys like Ben On at 75. We can get up to guys like Siwu at 77. And to me, when we know the field, at least sharper fields, are going to jam the low sevens, you almost have to go with a higher 6K guy to be able to get into this upper 7K range that the field most likely building Scheffler lineups won't be able to get to.
I like that. I like that plan. So I'll take if I have to choose between those two, I'd take Wrighton
Okay.
over Schmid.
Okay, we'll take Wrighton. 70, 77, 7,600 left per player. So
Yep.
Nero, we can go Siwoo, we can go Sanjay, Hoygaard at 79. I'll let you pick the highest price guy we go with here.
Let's go. Let's go Siwoo at 7,700. Although that leaves the 7,650. I think you're right. I think you want to spend up again, up in air quotes there, like one more time. Probably Pendrith at 7,900. I think you could make a case to jump up and grab like a Harry Hall at 8,400 if you wanted to be aggressive. And then you could have two of those $7,300 values like your Jordan Smiths down there, and you could do that way as well. I might do that way personally, but I think maybe the Pendrith way would be a little bit safer, and then you've got 7,550 left for your last two spots.
Yeah, perfect. So we could do that, and then the key here is what contest are you playing in? Because if you're playing a contest where there aren't a lot of pros, feel free to play guys like Kevin Yu and Chris Goddard up here. But if you're playing in a larger contest or you're looking for the pivot, a lot of the guys we named at the top of the model or in some of the betting market moves are in this range as direct pivots at super low ownership. So Luke Clanton, uh, who else? Jordan Smith, as you mentioned. We talked about Wright and we talked about Matty Schmidt. So that is the way to go here. I think there it's incredibly important this week just to realize what the average build is going to look like with and without Scheffler, and then making your ownership decisions based around that.
Totally agree with you. So if you did, well, let's see. So if you did Kim, you'd have 7,400 left, and then I think you could, stuff in a Jordan Smith at 7,300, and that would look pretty good to me, and I think that would be pretty appropriate for this type of contest, and that would leave you with 100 on the table. Again, as you said, you could go down, you could grab a Clanton, let's say it's 7,100, and then you could jump back up to the 8K again. Got Mav McNeely there at 8K, which I think would work pretty well. Rasmus Højgaard 7,900 would also work there. Even Dietrich at 7,800, I wouldn't hate playing him with that lineup. So I think there's those two ways you can go.
Yeah, and we look at this lineup here, whether it's Reeton or Schmid, those guys are going to be less than 5%. Siwoo less than 10%, Pendrith less than 10%. So once you get Scheffler and Penge, even if, and this is what we were talking about when we first started constructing this, if we put Penge in, we may have to change it later. But if these rest of these guys are that low owned, we feel fine playing someone like that. So again, keeping something in mind as you're hand building, this is how we would hand build a lineup, is knowing how it could change towards the end and how you may have to swap a guy to a lower owned option if you like chalkier guys towards the end of the build. So that'll do it for this video. Appreciate everyone watching. As always, we'll have a live stream for the Open Championship next week, so make sure you subscribe to the channel here on YouTube so you don't miss when that is, so you can hop in live and ask us questions. Daily Plug will be up Wednesday morning for the Scottish Open. Model is already up and running. Lineup Builder is already up and running. Ownership, Trifecta Plays, all that will be updated through Wednesday evening in Discord and on the site. So for Nero, I'm Brian. Thank you everyone for listening. Drop some more good lucks in the chat so I can advance out of round 2 of the Fantasy Golf World Championship. And I'll put the link in the comments as I did last week so you can sweat along with me. So for Nero, I'm Brian. Thanks again for listening. Good luck and enjoy the Scottish Open.